Today's episode is really a sports episode, and it's really kind of cool because it was like the first time I ever won an award for anything I did, and it was in Bakersfield. I had just started there in November of 1979, and I was the afternoon anchor, except when the morning anchor, news director Mark Howe, if he would go someplace to take vacation, then I was the morning anchor, and we were getting ready for the Current Press Club Awards. And the station really didn't do any sports, but there was a sports category. And of course, Mark wasn't into sports. Paul Lowe, who was our other anchor reporter, really wasn't so much into sports until later on. And I was. And so I wanted to enter something for the awards contest, Current Press Club Awards, that was sports, because I thought maybe it might be, to be honest with you, I thought it might be an easy win if I came up with something that was really unique. It was Bakersfield, smaller community, and we didn't have a whole lot of sports going on as far as sports broadcasts. There was some, not a lot. And I came up with the idea for Christmas Day, because Christmas Day I was going to be anchoring, and there was very rarely any news on Christmas. I mean, the holidays were just what they were, and you filled in with what you had, and you tried to plan some stuff ahead of time, some feature stuff that you could play in the newscast, so that to fill up the time and make it interesting as well. And so I decided that on my own that I would approach George Culver, who was a major league pitcher for the Indians and the Reds and some other teams in the '60s. And he was the baseball coach at Bakersfield College. And I would approach him and ask him to join me in a recreation of a game, an all-star game. And I had been, and have still been, Strat-O-Matic baseball and football player for years. Strat-O-Matic is a table game developed in the 1950s and football in the 1960s. And if you were a kid, at that time, you played either APVA baseball, or you played Strat-O-Matic. And you didn't play both because they didn't mix. The APA guys didn't like Strat-O-Matic guys, and Strat-O-Matic guys didn't like APA guys for the most part. So I was a diehard Strat-O-Matic player. My friends all were. We had leagues, and it was just. And some of you who know me and grew up with me at that time know how intense it was playing Strat-O-Matic. So I decided I'd call George and I'd say, look, would you be willing to sit down with me and play a game of Strat-O-Matic? And he said, what's Strat-O-Matic? And I had to explain it to him. And I said, look, you give me the top lineup of guys you played with in your era, and I'll pick their best years, and you manage that team, and I'll take the worst team of all time, the 1962 New York Mets, and we'll play, and you can pitch. You'll be the pitcher. You have, it's done with cards and dice and charts and everything. That's very, very accurate, very accurate. And he said, yeah, it sounds like fun. So he came over to the station, and we set up in a room, and we had the board, and we'd roll the dice, and he selected his the favorite guys. And I'm going to play part of that now, where he is introducing his lineup. This is George Culver.
Pete Rose, a former teammate of mine at Cincinnati, and certainly Pete needs no introduction. He's got over 3,000 hits, and hitting second, I have Joe Morgan, another former teammate. Hitting third is a fellow I never played with, but I had a chance to pitch against, Mickey Mantle. Hitting fourth, a fellow I consider maybe the toughest out of my career, at least, was Willie McCovey of the Giants. And hitting fifth, the late Roberto Clemente. I just recently saw a film of him. It was called A Touch of Royalty, and I think that pretty well sums up Roberto Clemente. Carl Yastrzemski would hit sixth. And Carl, in 1967, had 10 for 10 off me, and that was also the year he won the Triple Crown, so he sent me part of his raise the next year. But Johnny Bench would be the seventh place hitter and the catcher, and Johnny's a good personal friend of mine. I had an opportunity to play the first 2 years with him, his rookie and also his sophomore year. Hitting eighth, probably the most dangerous base stealer of all time, Maury Wills, and one of baseball's all-time great hitters, hitting ninth, George Culver.
So George gets his lineup set, and we we start playing the game, and we're rolling the dice, and I'm recreating the play-by-play. And so a little later in the game, and I've got the worst team of all time, and we know it's going to be a blowout. It's just how much of a blowout and how well George Culver is going to pitch his card, pitching against this the New York Mets, and with these great players behind him. So he comes up to bat, and this is one of the highlights of the game. Now, he had already stated he was one of the worst hitting pitchers of all time. Of course, later on, he said he was one of the best hitting pitchers of all time. We just had a lot of fun with it. And so there was an incident where he came to bat with runners on base. And I'll play that for you now.
Runners at first and second, and Culver All-Stars out in front 4-0 with starter Al Jackson gone already here in the first. Bob Miller with a record of 1-12 on the mound and allowed a whopping 20 home runs in 144 innings. Of course, he'll be facing pitcher George Culver, who's never hit a home run in his career. Here's the right-hander's first pitch. A high fastball whacked to center. A towering drive. Back goes Ashburn, away back to the wall. Leaps up. It's gone! A 3-run homer for George Culver, and we were just saying that he'd never had one. That one hit the top of the fence and bounced into the area around the flagpole. Culver, rounding the bases, is going bananas like a kid on Christmas morning who just got a new puppy. Meanwhile, Bob Miller's a little mad at himself on the mound, but it looks like he's having a tough time keeping from laughing. Culver looks into his own dugout.
And relief pitcher Sandy KOUFAX has just fainted on the bench, and they are trying to revive 3 or 4 other players with towels. Well, I'm sure it was a fastball, and Bob, an old friend of mine, knows that I can't hit, and he just threw the ball right down the middle, and I closed my eyes and swung, and I was as surprised as everybody else when it went over the fence.
That really got old George excited, so much so that he later came up with the dubious question.
And Culver's team, what are we called?
So George was having a great time with this. So we went on, and we played the game, and it came down to the final out, and it was 15-0. You know, his team with all these great players: Clemente, Yastrzemski, Bench, Maury Wills, McCovey, Rose, Morgan, Mantle, and he could only pick 8. And a relief pitcher who happened to be Sandy KOUFAX, who never got into the game, by the way, because George pitched a shutout. And so got down to the final out, and here's that.
All-Stars leading 15-0, 2 out in the ninth, with George Culver looking for a shutout against the 62 Mets in Yankee Stadium. The only Met he has to get is former Dodger great Charlie Neal. Jim Hickman on first. The 3-2 pitch to Neal is a ground ball down to Wills. He shuffles to Morgan. The force on Hickman. Culver leaps off the mound. He's done it. He's shut out the Mets with a strong effort, pitching a 5-hitter and great batting support by his all-star team, getting 15 runs on 14 hits.
So that's the way it ended. It ended 15-0. We did a post-game interview. I cut it up into 3 parts and 3 2-minute parts, and we played them on Christmas morning. And then it got entered into the contest, the Press Club Awards. And lo and behold, it won. It won Best Sports Feature. And it was my very first time I was honored, and I was so honored to be honored. It was so cool, and especially for something which was so close to my heart. Strat-O-Matic was so close to my heart that I won an award for that as my first broadcast award. My boss, Mark Howell, later told me, I didn't like that. I didn't like that project you did. And I said, what do you care? The station got an award for the current Press Club Award. So that's what it was. And so that's one of my immortal moments in Strat-O-Matic history, as well as my radio career. And the next one I'm going to talk about is actually another sports story, but it's a tremendous story about the 1924 Olympics and how I interviewed a 1924 Olympian some odd, it would have been 50 plus years later, on a very unusual story. And it's just one of the great stories of all time, I think, and just a fun story. So we'll have that for you next. Thanks for joining me.